Week 3 Pantheon Rhulk Indomitable has finally dropped, and with the power level penalty being -15, we are starting to see more and more groups, more communities, and just more players start to truly struggle in this content. I kind of put off making this video, but I think it's starting to become very important, especially when you're in groups and teams that are, dying a lot, that are not able to pump out the damage in time, and also not be able to receive a platinum score on every single encounter. So it's finally time for this video, and of course we'll do one next week for the Rhulk, Nezi, and Riven edition of this as well when it's at contest -20. A rule of thumb that I like to use is, even though some of these encounters you don't need to worry about platinum because you still get the bonus, it is always best to try to get as quick of an encounter clear as possible if you can. The reason I always believe that is important is because the longer you are in an encounter, the more chances of ammo becoming an issue, the more chances that deaths become an issue. So when we get to like Rhulk, for example, there's no reason to just want to just do a 3-phase. There's no reason not just wanting to just burn through as quickly as you can, because obviously it can be the difference between a clear or not if someone just doesn't have ammo on that 3rd phase, someone just doesn't have a super on that 3rd phase, someone doesn't have a revive on that 3rd phase. Going against a timer is never a good thing, especially when enemies hit harder and harder. So I always like to disregard that and just focus on doing what is necessary. Feel free to skip around the chapters if you and your team are struggling with a certain encounter. I'm going to give you what me and my team did. We did a lot of testing in our runs to see what works on each boss. Of course, we have Arc Surge and we have Stasis Surge. We also have Class Warfare back, which means when you pop your class ability, you get a bonus to your weapons and your super and all your damage up to 25%. So we want to also take advantage of that as well. Golgoroth is probably the easiest thing. You can still bring your Nighthawks, still bring Wells. Wells, in my opinion, are the most important thing because we just want to live through all 6 pools. Damage isn't really an issue here, especially if your gaze holders have a tractor. You can just stun the boss, track to the back, and then just hold the gaze while you have some Wells and popping damage. Because the most important thing is making sure the Wells are popped so they can live. And you can have the person holding the gaze stand in the well back behind the team. That way there's a direct line of sight to damaging the boss each time. The other big thing is, of course, the unstable light. Having every single one of those go off make this very, very easy. In and out in about 6 minutes. Simple 2-phase. If you get really, really good damage out of the team on top of that, easy 1-phase. I don't imagine this strat being much different next week, but if it is, we'll talk about that next week. Weapons here this week is probably best to bring a Storm Chaser. You can also bring Fire and Forget if you have one of those. Damage buffs like Field Prep, Fire in Line, Auto-Loading Holster, Izanagi's Burden are also really good to add in. And of course, I would probably not bring a Tether, as Tether will always stun the boss and can make him not point towards the team, which we don't want. So just bring a couple Nighthawks, bring your Wells, and just make sure all the unstable lights damage the boss. Caretaker this week is actually a pretty easy 2-floor as well. As with Arc, one of your best choices if you have one is an Explosive Light Wendigo. Because of the strat of doing a 2-floor, you have a well in the first plate, well on the second plate, which will pretty much always give you max explosive light for each floor. And then when you go to that final plate, you can have a Tether and then have all your Nighthawks and Needle Storms and Thunder Crashes just go to town. And a really cool thing to add, as you've probably seen a few times, is of course bringing something like Grand Overture for one of your Nighthawks. They can have a thing where they do a barrage of Nighthawks, then right after they do Grand Overture, or Grand Overture into Nighthawk. Both are really good if you are losing out on some damage or want to just very make sure you get that 2-floor. A good note as well, if you're running a Wendigo, one of the players should always run Wendigo with Explosive Light and be a Tether. instead of doing tractor. Obviously tether is going to give you the same debuff, 30%, but you can still be able to do a lot of damage by being basically a support player, where you have Lumina to give your team that 35% damage buff, just to make sure you get that 2 floor. You have the tether that will also make sure the final plate, where you want your big burst damage, gets as much damage off as possible. Of course, this is on top of your surges and on top of your class warfare buff. Lumina, of course, isn't necessary, but remember, we're trying to get out of here as fast as we can and make sure that we are getting that 2 floor no matter what. And if you're using Wendigo, of course, you can always use Izanagi's Burden as well, but you can always trade it off for just, you know, anything else. Arc fusions are really good. Any arc fusion, especially ones that have a control burst or volt shot, do really well for supplemental damage when you're waiting for, you know, the next plate to happen. So give it a shot. Once again, the biggest issue you'll come across is ad clear. Running a Invis Hunter is always really good. Running a, you know, well, an additional well, if you have 2 wells for the plates, having an additional well just for ad clear is always really good. Once again, remember, damage isn't an issue here. You have really easy 2 floor. All we need to make sure is that everyone lives long enough to get through the phases. Having an issue where someone dies and you lose your explosive light is brutal. Having an issue where someone's dead or we don't have a res available at the end is brutal as well. Just like Caretaker, Explicator is pretty much more the same. Unlike last week and unlike a lot of times, I do not think having the 1 well in the middle is the best choice. I think just moving with your team from left to right to middle with the 3 wells is safest. 1, because less chance of people dying to the fire. 2, less chances of people, you know, getting blocked by damage. You know, sometimes somebody might be late to getting back in position and then they block your damage, especially if you're using rockets or grenade launchers. Probably safest is just have a very simple, you know, 3-2-1 strat, 3 warlocks, 2 titans or 2 hunters, and 1 of the other. What I would suggest is having 2 hunters, 1 with Orpheus Rig Tether, or 2 if you really want to push damage. You can also change off of that 1 hunter and put on another T-Crash, or just make it be a Nighthawk, and the rest should be just Phoenix Wells, because here is the most important area that's going to get teams killed, and that is surviving. You don't really need the Needle Storm. You don't need any of that funny, you know, I saw a content creator do this stuff. You need to live. So all we need to worry about is what strategies we can use that will cause the fewest deaths and the most consistent DPS. Thunderlord is a good option. We're going to talk about that later on, but you can also use Grand Overture. But if you're going to use Grand Overture, you better have another weapon that works, you know, after that, you know, 1 volley. Otherwise, Wendigo is still great here. Izanagi is still great here. Nighthawk's still great here. If you don't have a Wendigo, you can always go for a Typhon with explosive light as well. Just use GLs. Atraks this week is Arc, so you need to just buckle down. If you don't have Curious, if you don't have Starter Scales, I would do my best to just go get those things. That way you can just bring a bunch of Titans, bring a bunch of Gathering Storms, and just cook this guy quickly. If there was ever a time for you to just have a secondary character, do it. Remember, we are just here for the clear. You don't need to only one character. You know, you can always have Thundercrash just for this 1 encounter, because the more Thundercrashes you have, the easier and quicker this will go. We still have to worry about the score. We still have to worry about the platinum. So that's why we want to have as many, you know, Thundercrashes and just burst supers as possible. Parasite's still really good here. I'm pretty sure that Grand Overture is okay here, but I wouldn't recommend it personally. The volley, of course, can kill you. The volley can be kind of inconsistent on Atraks. Just use Thundercrash. Just use Gathering Storm. Now, Gathering Storm's not great, but Gathering Storm's better than some of the other choices. Blade Barrage is still good as well. Most important thing to get the 500,000 score is a few things. We want to kill all the Atraxes. We want to kill all of the servitors, all the enemies, because we need as many points as possible. My threshold when I do helps is to always get to about 97,000 points before we get to final stand. That way, when we have to kill the 2 Atraxes or the 1, we get the maximum bonus possible. You also have to take into account how much bonus time you have left. The more time you have left on the bonus timer, the bigger the point total you get at the end. You know, that big bonus that you get after completing the encounter. The more bonus time you have, the more score you get. So that's why I want to do this as quickly as we can. In theory, you want to always have, you know, the 4-2 split. You want to kill 1 tormentor down below and then bring everyone up top. This is why we got to do all this stuff quickly. We also want to cleanse all of the tormentor guys when we see them for the extra points. We also want to keep 1 well of radiance for final stand just in case. It's always really nice because by the time we have final stand, we have laments. So we want to have the extra damage buff from class warfare and from the well. This is the one area you see a lot of people holding a checkpoint. So you can always do that, but always just kill stuff fast, pick up all the orbs, get all the medals, and you should be able to do this pretty much first try. Oryx hasn't really changed much from last week. Some people are still using Whisper of the Worm. Whisper is still really good for a simple 2-phase, especially with ammo economy. But a lot of people are using Storm Chaser. A lot of my team use Storm Chaser as well. You can also use Reed's Regret. The damage is pretty equal. I think on a couple wipes we tested, my damage was just a little bit lower, maybe like 100,000, maybe 200,000 less. But with class warfare, with, you know, Lumina buff, if you have someone using like a debuff, maybe any of those things, you have more than enough for a simple 2-phase. All you need here is, outside the 2 wells, is have everyone else on ad clearing supers. Having a arc staff is really good. Having a blade barrage is really good. Having a chaos reach is really good. And a strand titan or an arc titan simply to take out the tormentor really quickly is also really good. Very simple. If you've done it last week, use the same stuff, swap out from Whisper to Reed's Regret or Storm Chaser, and you should have no problems doing it this week as well. Last but certainly not least, we have Rhulk from Root of Nightmares. Rhulk is the one that has gotten so many people issues, and we're going to talk about the best and simplest and most consistent ways you can get this done. This is not considering that you might join a stacked team, but this is if you and your friends or you and LFG or 510 Finders are struggling to get this done. This is what you want to run. I ran it a lot. I find this to be very consistent. Last thing we'll talk about, of course, is weapons, but I do think having a 3-2-1 strat is pretty much the best play, because obviously we want to get a 2-phase, a clean 2-phase. We want to get out of here with the bonus time still on the timer, and we want to just knock this out in as quick as we can, because always we don't want to be in here for too long. If we got to do a 3-phase, that's just 3, you know, phases where someone can die and we have to wipe anyway. So if we are a little bit away from a 2-phase, we might as well clean up a little bit and go for a 2-phase. You want to have a Warlock with Cenotaph and Divinity. That Cenotaph Divinity is going to tag every single one of those tormentors, and the rest of the team is going to cook that tormentor ASAP. You want to have a Orpheus Rig Hunter with Tether. Every single time that tormentor shows up, he's going to tether that area, so he's going to suppress that tormentor so the tormentor can't do anything. Once he's suppressed, we're going to knock off the weak points on the shoulders, then get that tether on him, and then get that div on him and cook him. Waste that heavy, because Cenotaph is going to make more heavy. If you have a second hunter, which you should, you can have them also use Orpheus Deadfall Tether. That way when they use their tether, they give you orbs. When you do your tether, gives them orbs, and then between the 2 of y'all, you can always make sure everyone is topped off on explosive light on wells, and that makes the ad clearing part of this free, because you'll never have enemies showing up. None of the tormentors will be, you know, hurting you, because they all are cooked. And then you can then have one of those hunters stay on tether. Other one can swap to Nighthawk or Star Eater Scales Golden Gun at the top, and then you have a lot of burst damage as well. For your other 2 warlocks, you're going to have a Phoenix Protocol warlock for both of them. You could swap out Phoenix for a stag well if you are still dying in the well, but as long as that well is 100 Zil, you should be able to tank at least a couple hits. If you really need to, swap the stag. Same thing, you'll get a few more damage resistance hits off the kicks. So if you can really live, you don't need stag, but if your team's still dying, feel free to swap off of that to put on stag. With the shade, we want to have one more well where the clone or the shade, whatever you want to call it, is going to be aggro to. In theory, you want a Oryx Titan with Thunder Crash. That way they can pull the aggro away from the team so they can get free damage. And if they get low or sooner or later, when he's away from the team, he can then Thunder Crash away from the clone and go right to the boss. And then just by that time, put a lot of damage. It's a really nice strategy. Have the Titan move away from the team and then Thunder Crash away from the clone and Thunder Crash the boss. With all the tethers, with all the wells, and all the golden guns, that Thunder Crash should be able to have 2 supers in one phase as long as they live. So you're gonna have a lot of burst damage from all 3 locations. When it comes to damage, a lot of people have been talking about Thunderlord. Thunderlord is a really safe option that can be 2-phaseable as long as everyone is, able to sit in a well and just never stop firing. Sometimes you'll have the issue of the moment one person has to move around and has to re-rev up Thunderlord, you're gonna lose a lot of damage. If you are able to stand in a well and just never stop firing, it is a comfortable 2-phase. If your teammates are moving around constantly and not just sitting there wholly laying down on the trigger, you're gonna have a lot of issues. You could also do rockets. Rockets are also really good here. The only issue with a rocket is if you miss, you're missing a lot of damage. If you hit all your shots, rockets are going to be probably the best choice here. A good middle ground is going to be grenade launchers. Explosive light on a GL is huge, much larger than on a rocket. Most people aren't using Wolfpack rounds here, so you can also use a rocket with explosive light. But if you miss it, that's a lot of damage. It's like 400,000 you miss if you miss that rocket. With a grenade launcher, it's only about 300,000, but if you miss it, you are still going to be able to get a lot of shots off really quickly, so it's not as brutal missing a shot. You can also pair it with Izanagi's Burden. You can pair it with fusion rifles. If you're close enough with Div, you can do slugs. As long as it's arc or stasis, it's going to do a lot of damage. Damage isn't really the issue here, but Thunderlord, rockets, and grenade launchers all can do a 2-phase. Thunderlord is a comfortable 2-phase. Rockets and grenade launchers, if you do really well with them, are all going to be a comfortable 1-phase or 1-phase and a little bit of a 2-phase. It all really depends on you and your team, but if you're looking to get to clear, those are the 3 best choices I would suggest, and the only things I would suggest. The safest options as well is having a 3 warlocks, 2 hunters, and a titan. You can also mix and match the hunters and titans, but you want to have a T-crash because the orbs are going to give you 2 T-crashes a phase as long as they don't die, and you pop all of your supers. And it's going to be very consistent, and you can replicate that system with a lot of other teams and a lot of other players, no matter their skill. For helps, this is what I'm using. This is a guide to make sure you can get your clear in a simple, efficient time. If you've watched this far, if you're still struggling with Pantheon, especially week 3 or week 4, feel free to come by the Twitch stream. We'll be doing helps every single day, getting as many people as we can through. All I ask is that you listen and you just follow my lead, and we'll take you to victory. Thanks so much for watching this video. Hopefully this helps you with Pantheon, and until next week, we'll see you in the next one.